Okay, all right. Everyone joins. We're just gonna give it a few minutes. Let people come in. All right. Great, everyone coming in. We're just gonna give a few more minutes so that everyone can arrive and land.
Everybody, I just as a quick heads up, my audio, I'm not able to hear anything on my side despite a half an hour of trying to fix it. So I was prepared for this, but I can't. Hopefully you can hear me, but I cannot hear you. So we'll let Greta be my ears, and maybe Greta, if there's questions that come up or things that I say that don't make sense, maybe you can just step in and do the audio for and speak on my behalf or our behalf. Now one thing I need to pull the presentation up because I've been troubleshooting here, so give me a second.
Yeah, perfect. So in the meantime, I want to thank everyone for coming. This is a topic that James and I, each time we've dropped in to chat about it and we start to pull these threads, there's always a lot of energy and a lot of excitement around the potential for evolving a lot of the work that we've all done over the years in a meaningful way. And so that's kind of the intention with which we're leading today.
Okay, so hopefully you guys can see this. Yes? Okay, great. Okay, let's launch straight into this. Sorry, guys. It's always fun. I was at the World Cup game last night till very late. It was a 9 p.m. game. I got home at like 1 in the morning. So bear with me. Thanks for everybody for jumping onto this webinar. I think we have like 60 plus people signed up for this. This will not be just a me, James, trying to sell you something again type of webinar. This is a webinar about risk-based social auditing, what I'm calling risk-based social auditing. And we're basically going to walk through what that means, how we think about social auditing, how it has evolved, and the way we believe very, very strongly that it needs to evolve going forward. Just as a quick, for those of you that do not know me or us, we are a boutique labor, social compliance, human rights firm. We come from a whole variety of backgrounds that relate working from brands to service providers. Greta and I particularly have worked together for over 20 years, founding Levelworks, that became Elevate, and then we have people on our team that came from Verite and work and all these different brands. We have expertise very much on supply chain, human rights, labor, all the different initiatives across all industries. We also have a global network of consultants that mostly visit factories to help support remediation and improvement and training. We do your occasional audit here and there and have been doing that for years. That is definitely my background. Having worked in this space from the very, very beginning, focusing on labor and social and human rights auditing. We also do program advisory, program management, end-to-end. And we also do, as I mentioned, some investigations. Now, after many years of thinking about jumping back into the auditing space, that's essentially what this webinar is about how and why we're doing it and what it's going to look like. Okay, so today we are going to cover why we audit generally, what's the history there, what's not working about it, and also what has worked about it. What are the things about it that we should take stock in that have actually changed and improved over the years. What regulators now, or the term regulators, which we're going to use that collectively as like, what is this world of regulation around us and what does it seem, what is the direction that they're asking for us? I know there's millions of webinars about Human Rights Due Diligence and this and that, and they go on and on and on forever. So I think most of you guys will know that, but we'll whip through that quickly because I think it's a pretty simple concept. We're going to define salient risks, and then we're going to jump into the model that we created and give you an introduction to how that's working, what the next steps we have for our pilot of launching that. And then we are going to invite you also to join us for discussion on how that's going to develop. So we already have a few companies that are lined up to pilot this process, but we would like more input from people on this webinar and people that we consider industry experts on the ground, auditors, even other audit firms that are interested in taking this journey with us. So that's an open invitation. Okay. Let's get to the good stuff. So first, what is the origin of sort of social auditing for those that have been around as long as I have? And I consider myself the second generation to get into this line of work, even though I've been doing it for 25 plus years. You know, there was an original excitement around there, even by civil society and a lot of organizations, when the original idea that a buyer would audit their own factories for labor and human rights conditions and then use their leverage over them to drive them to improve. That was like a big deal at the time. It was like an epiphany. It was like everyone was supportive. It was such a cool idea. But essentially, you know, it was all based on the shame game. It was based on, well, there was some lawsuits originally on the Mariana Islands, but at the same time, it really did evolve into a voluntary, everything was voluntary, based on reputational protection and shame mitigation model. And then that kind of evolved into really what is a mainstream legacy industry association expectation that's totally voluntary. And that's why you see so much variance in the industry about how these programs work, what they are not. And that's kind of where we're at today. Jumping ahead, we were going to do a poll. Is that something we can do, guys?
Yes.
Considering, yeah, we are. We're going to do a quick poll with you guys. So if you guys pull up your phones, I'll do it myself. And we're going to do a quick poll just on ask a couple of questions, and then we'll review the poll at the end of the hour. So let's see. Do this right in front of you. This is the Menti app. When considering your company's current approach to assessing labor conditions and supply chains, what aspects do you feel work well? So this is just a quick, this is take literally like 60 seconds, things that come to your mind that you look at your program and go, yeah, this is actually working pretty well.
And for those of you that might not have your own program, consider it from the industry as well. What do you think about certification schemes or initiatives? What seems to be working well?
I'm going to submit this based on the programs that we manage for other brands and what I think is working well for them. Okay, let's just give that another, it's 8:13 on my phone until 8:14. Okay. Okay, let's move on. Next, let's do a quick appreciation actually for what social auditing has evolved, how it has evolved certainly since I first got involved with this space. I mean, so much. Wow. I mean, first of all, the amount of auditors, the amount of auditing, something that people lament to some degree that there's so much auditing. But, you know, 25 years ago, there was vast amounts of even tier one supply chains that were not being touched across a lot of industries, like toys, apparel, those were the first ones kind of hit. And then, you know, then it moved on to food and ag and you know, and everywhere it is today. But if you look at it, I mean, what has been built for scale. And even though there are still sort of not enough auditors, as I say, to do even more auditing, there's still the amount of scale, the number of firms, the number of people and players and people even within the industry that have exposed themselves and had spent years already looking at labor conditions and audit reports, the infrastructure, industry associations. You know, we've actually built up a lot. There's a lot of brain power and people power and people embedded in companies that are focusing on human rights and labor conditions every single day. That is a huge change. I think I look at it. Some people look at it with scorn. Other people look at it. I personally think that's amazing. Like, look how many people out there are trying to work on these issues. Surely we can do something better. Surely we can mobilize ourselves to make changes in the industry that drive better improvement. We're ready to mature and go to the next level. So I want to take, that's a moment of appreciation for everybody on the phone probably that is in this space. So let's go quickly. This is not going to be a long James ripping on the social auditing industry. That's another webinar I can link you to. But let's just go through the top things that are really falling short, that were not anticipated initially when I think when these audits were set up. First of them is there's totally varying expectations. We did a really interesting webinar about this a couple of years ago, really kind of going down the line, like the expectation for what a social audit is to a worker, to a manager of a factory, to a supplier, to a brand, to a civil society member, somebody in the activist community, and to the government is they're all totally different. And you actually, if you unpack that, it's really fascinating because the expectation of what it is, what it means, how it helps or does not help is different depending on who you ask. So when you look at it from a critical standpoint, it's not really a big surprise that whatever comes out the other end of a social audit, that not everyone's happy with it. And so one of the key things about going forward is that we need to align on what it is and what it is not, and what is capable of giving us in a positive way. So that's a big one. These audits and these programs are scoped too broadly. For the amount of time we have on site, which is probably 0.3, the amount of things that we're asking a person to go into a factory to do in a day or two is so big and so wide. And if you get into the trickier issues, it's so complex. It's completely set up for failure. And so that's a very big one. Why are we sending in auditors? I'll pick on SLCP just for a second to go in there and have them validate 1,000 points. Like, it's insane. Even if you look at the FLA standards, your standard that a lot of auditors use, it's many different things. So they're too broadly scoped. The limited on-site matches with that. How much time do you have on site and how many things we got to get done? The reporting is massively restrictive for auditors. And this is a big thing you'll see that's different across different programs, is that an auditor feels trapped that they cannot or should not be reporting back information that I would call intelligence if they cannot triangulate and prove something that is happening. Several of the issues that are not being caught in audits are those that do not lend themselves to being proven. And so that's an issue. We have a bottleneck of information that's sort of dying on the vine within auditors that they're not putting in reports, and they're even getting in trouble for putting in reports. So that's a big issue that's holding back even the current structure of what social auditing is happening right now. Oh, the next one is lack of independence. 25 years ago, 90% of the audits that we were doing, we were being asked to do on behalf of a brand, and their expectation for us was, as audit firms, as an auditor, was to find especially the most critical issues as the priority. What the industry has evolved to is the opposite. Now it's 60 or 70% of all the audits are being done with the factory themselves being given the power to decide who audits them. I go on and on about this forever if you know me. However, this is still a core functional problem with the social audit world right now. The auditee, back in the day, we used to call these self-audits. Brands wouldn't even allow them. But the whole system's become a self-auditing program. Go out. And so what that's made, it's made the brand, not the brands, the audit firms themselves, in order to survive and build and have a flourishing business in the social auditing field, you have to sell directly to factories. Factories are looking for a different end product than a brand. And this is huge and central to the problem. The announcement model, simple as that. If you're looking for really critical issues in known salient risk areas of risk and you go announced, it's going to make it much more difficult to find them. Is there a place for fully announced engaged audits with factories? Absolutely. That is a very critical tool, actually, when it gets to things like transparency and other really tricky issues. But so these are the kind of the big ones. There's more. But at the end of the day, where does you put this all together? And what does it end up being? We're not finding the critical issues. You don't have to look far to validate this. You can look at the hundreds and hundreds of exposés that come out about what's happening in a particular country versus what's being shown by brands that are sourcing there, companies that are sourcing there. You can look at even you can ask the auditors themselves, as I'll show you on the next slide. Like, we're not finding the problems, and this is the problem. Okay. And this is also a problem that I think a friend of mine just last week, he called it the Scott Nova problem, which is, for those of you that don't know Scott Nova, he is a very well-known, aging, but well-known activist that's very critical of this world. And this is him, in front of Congress. And this was a very famous quote. He called social auditing, in practice, it involves in giving unqualified people inadequate time to pursue an unrealistic objective they have no incentive to achieve. So this is what regulators are hearing. They're hearing from those that know this, and they know people that know what's happening on the ground. And why do you have to put two and two together here. Why do we have new laws? Is because of this and because of this. It's really a simple math. Okay, so let's actually ask the auditors what they say. A couple of years ago, I did a big survey of over 200 auditors that are out there, probably a 20-question survey to dig at this. Like, to what degree do auditors in the field actually also agree with this? And what we found was really fascinating. So the first one is that on a scale of 1 to 5, how big of a gap do you believe there is between what is really happening at a work site and what is being found and reported during an audit? So they believe it's 2.8. This is of this cohort of auditors. This were from all over the world. The second question, I'm just picked out 3 just to share with you guys. Please rank the variables you feel most contribute to not finding such issues during the audit, or contributing to finding issues. On-site time allocation, the unannounced aspect of the audit, and flexibility to focus on critical issues when they are suspected. That third one is huge, because when you talk about overscoped audits and restrictive reporting, auditors are get in trouble if they do not finish an entire audit every time. So that means that their ability to switch gears, go and dig into the areas that they think are happening or suspecting, they can't do that in most audits. At the time, the firm that I was working where, we were trying to implement a new rule whereby the auditors had the ability to do that regardless of what the clients or programs were set up to do. So there are ways to get around these issues. The last one here is, do you feel the critical issues are sometimes found or highly suspected but not reported for some reason? So only 6% said yes, this is very common, but yes, sometimes 40%. That's auditors saying that. This isn't me. This isn't a critic. These are the people that are actually in the factories representing us doing this work. 34% no, not very common, and no, never. Again, this is a global checklist. So you have countries where this could be very common or not. Let's see how I'm doing on time. 8:27. Okay. So what changes are really being asked for? And when I say being asked for, I'm talking about legislators. I'm talking about the whole wave of human rights due diligence. There's so many countries every day. It's just like constant webinars and postings and laws, and what is at the heart of all this is OECD expectations for due diligence that require or asking, giving permission to brands and retailers and companies to use a risk-based approach, focusing on what matters most to workers. So we've heard this all before in the past. And I think one of the things that there's so many webinars about what all these different steps mean and how they calibrate or coordinate with what we currently have, our voluntary programs, how they were constructed and how they built and how they match into these laws. If you know a little bit about just basic quality management systems, the 6 steps of due diligence is just a basic QMS. It's about risk assessment up front, right? It's about setting policies, objectives, what you're trying to achieve. It's doing a risk assessment of your operation, in this case, your supply chain, and also internal operations. And it is a basic plan, do, check, act structure. It's not actually that complicated. They structured it in such a way that is a known way of looking at quality management systems. So I feel like there's a lot of myths, and there's so many webinars about this, that, and the other thing, but really, essentially, if you boil it down to that, that's really what it is. Okay. So what are salient risks? So salient risks are essentially, in a very simple way of looking at it, is just those risks that are happening most commonly, and with a focus on those salient, critical, and zero tolerance risks that exist in a particular place. So they're not going to be the same for every country. And our ability to find those and identify salient risks can be done in a whole different variety of different ways, not just through social auditing. It can be done through web scrubbing, past reports, research, talking to people, talking to your peers, etc. But salient risks are essentially those issues that we should be prioritizing, that regulators are asking us to prioritize. They're essentially begging us to prioritize it, wherever it can be found in your supply chain. So if you really think about the whole purpose of a social auditing program or even a brand program, it's really as simple as like, hey, stop focusing on every single topic in your code of conduct and every single country you're doing, they're sourcing from. Let's take the worst stuff. Let's find out where it may be, wherever it is in the supply chain, and let's motivate and focus our resources on that. And that's the simplest way that I can put it. If you are a big retailer doing 3,000 tier 1 audits across your entire code of conduct every year for all your tier 1 suppliers, what's being asked of you is just that you don't need to do that. That's not risk-based. Risk-based is doing 500 audits in the right places based on known salient risks, doing it the right way and following up rigorously. Like, that's the new program. It's not that big of a shift, and regulators are essentially asking you to do that. They're giving you the roadmap. This graphic on the side just shows that, like, if there was a salient risk, I used to call it a salient risk benchmark. This black line would represent saying research, understanding of what salient risk exists, say, in a particular country, in this case, China. And then these colored lines below are the ability for different brand programs, how they're auditing, to actually find those issues in that country that should be expected to be found. So there's ways of sort of measuring different types of programs and their effectiveness on getting to the truth, essentially. Okay, so I'm gonna maybe Greta, can you see the questions? If there's any questions, I wanted to have a quick pause, because that's really kind of getting through us the whole why and everything, and then I'm going to jump into the salient risk supplier assessment that we have been working on.
Yeah, great. No
Actually,
questions.
If there's any questions that you would have to answer the questions, because I can't hear anything.
Right now, we don't have any questions.
No?
No.
Okay. Let's just jump straight in. Okay. So what really is a salient risk supplier assessment? First of all, what we've constructed is actually nothing really new. It's really just, how do we focus on the things that matter most, and how will that change the way we prepare for an audit? How do we do the audit, and how do we report the audit, and how do we use that information? Salient risk supply auditing, or focused or targeted auditing, is something that's been happening for a long time, but in a very pocketed way and in a non-scalable way. I'll use two examples. When we first launched LevelWorks, this was like over 20 years ago. I was based in China at the time, and what ended up becoming Elevate was our entire niche within the social auditing field was that we were the one firm that was really, really focused on digging, investigating, and uncovering how many factories were manipulating, falsifying the social audit process. It was a known salient risk for China, Bangladesh, India, to Vietnam, etc. So they had this group of countries that we figured out very closely and really down to the ground that a huge number of factories were falsifying their records, and they were hiding a lot of different things that were really important. And so our whole niche, in a way, was doing a full audit, but within that audit, we spent a lot of time and a lot of focus prepping on site and reporting on transparency issues. That, in a way, was a salient risk focused assessment wrapped up in a normal social auditing protocol. Another example that is the most common example for doing a targeted assessment, and that a lot of companies do here and there, is when there's an expose. Something comes out about a factory. The WRC is doing an expose on a factory. A huge industry report comes out about Malaysia, about Taiwan. The big one we worked on in the early years of LevelWorks was Jordan. Jordan was being audited by many, many factories just using a normal cookie cutter standard social audit, but only some of these firms and some of these audits were even finding this huge migrant labor issue that existed until there was a massive expose. And then everything switched. Everyone's doing targeted assessments on migrant workers and how they're being brought into the country and how they're being treated in their contracts. Total focus on a very important salient risk that the whole industry mobilized around. USA got involved, et cetera. So this idea of focusing on critical issues that are touching a particular supply chain is nothing new. It's just not been the way that at scale brands have approached their program, which is a totally cookie cutter approach, not geared to the country, the product category, or the type of facility or supplier that they're looking at. This is essentially just us trying to create a way to do that is highly effective, that's scalable, and that can be done by all. This journey into in creating this assessment process is totally open source. We are a tiny firm piloting this, and we plan on growing our team more to do this. But it is something that we are really trying to advocate the entire industry to shift to. We believe that civil society, NGOs, and regulators are wanting us to make the shift. Okay. Okay. Breathe. Okay. So essentially, this is made up of 5 steps, and we're going to have 1 slide for each step. Let's see, what time is it? 8:32. I'm going to try to get through this quick so that we can dig into questions. And we're going to have another poll, and then we're going to have an invitation to get involved, give us your feedback. There are a lot of people on the call today. There is a really overwhelming number of people, not just random people, but a lot of people that have been in this space for a long time that I have a lot of respect for, that have been doing this and working on these problems for a long time in very influential companies and organizations. So there's a lot of brain power and experience that's on this call right now. And I'm so happy that you are joining the call, and that I want every bit of your feedback to be harvested and used to make this the best as we can make it, and share it to the extent that we can. So 5 real steps: harvesting data, evaluating that data for risk, creating a target on onsite plan, and then also a final report and how that looks differently, and then how that feeds into improving the remediation in a more real, actionable way. Okay, so first step, simple. Gather as much information as you can to build the risk picture before going on site. At this stage, if you're bringing on a new factory, they may not have anything. So you're really only going with information that is that about the product category, the country, the type of factory it is. But in many instances, we have a lot of information. We have past audit reports, we've got SAQs, and we need to with technology now, it's very easy to just harvest this information in. And I'm listing all these different organizations because everybody is out there. Even though for a while I would criticize that an entire program would just hand everything over to SMETA, SADX, or one of these things, I have a totally different view on it now. I believe all these reports have value. They're not perfect. They suffer from a lot of the issues that we already went over, and they're not finding the critical issues to the extent that they really should be. But that does not mean all the data and everything that's in there does not have value. It does. So harvesting whatever a factory can give you or a supplier can give you is really important first part of the process. Second one is using technology to make sense of it. If you give me 3 reports or 5 reports or 10 reports over a factory you visited over 10 years, and you marry that up with known salient risk issues that have been identified through exposés, through risk indicators, through government publications, through all the different things that all these technology companies are using to do risk profiling, is really pretty easy to do. Our technology partner and the system that we use every day is AI. You probably see them all over LinkedIn. But what they've built's amazing. It really has. And to be honest, you could do this yourself. You could create a very simple AI widget using a variety of these technologies to do exactly this. Pull in reports from a supplier, scrub the web, make sense of all it, and then compare it to known risk indices by country and shoot out a result. It's not hard to do with all the different tools at our disposal. We want to operationalize this the way we're doing the audit process. So Elm is a great partner, thought partner, and how that will be ultimately will land. But this is this key part to the process that in the past even a year or two, like we weren't thinking about how we could do this to benefit what we're trying to achieve. So what pops out is, okay, we know all this information about a supplier, we know all this information about a particular country. Why are we spending our little allocated 2-man days on site looking at 175 different points? Why are we need to be focusing on the things that matter most to workers and that are salient to that country and supplier, and use that extra time to do that part really, really, really well in a way that you build a lot of confidence in how a factory or supplier is performing on those key issues. That is the arc of the narrative. The narrative is, who is your company? What does your supply chain look like? Where are salient risks found within your supply chain? How are you evaluating them? Not just when you're evaluating them or who you're evaluating them. This is the how. How are you evaluating them? And that's really the key piece when you look at a lot of the risk profiling things that are being done out there. Everything's focused on like when we should audit, or maybe we shouldn't audit there, but we should do it then, and we should do it more frequent, and we should do it less frequent, but we're still using the same blunt cookie cutter instrument across all the different countries, and that to me is the big opportunity here. Okay, so what does onsite look like? What's different about the onsite? And I have a much more detailed FAQ at the back of this presentation that gets a little bit more into the very specifics and the details. So what focus and standard are we using when we're doing the onsite? We have decided that if we want to build something that's something that can be understood by a regulator, that we need to use terminology, language, definitions that align with what they know, which is international institutions like the ILO, UNGP. So everything in our process is aligned with those definitions, how they define things, and not some code or some. I mean, a lot of the codes and standards that have been written out there are great. They're thorough, they're technical, they cover everything, but they use their own language, and they're coming out of a company or an organization that really a regulator doesn't really know what that is. So we feel like the foundation is already there. We never actually ever even needed codes of conduct. All the structure and the laws and are there, and the international standards too. Okay. Traditional audits, obviously, they're using a fragmented standards of all different shapes and sizes, you name it. You guys know that. The commercial structure, this is a totally brand directed process. Suppliers have no say in when or how this is being done. It's totally directed by a brand. They are not the ones actually selecting and going out onto the open market to hire who audits them. Auditor discretion, that's the third one here. This is a very important one. Right. In this process, the auditor has the time to focus on the key areas that have been identified for that supplier and that factory and that audit. And if something comes up that's they feel needs to be further investigations, they have the flexibility to go and dig deep to the extent that they need to on site. They are not limited. They're not going to get in trouble for not filling out the ergonomic section of the report. It is totally focused on the salient risks and understanding if they're happening and how they're happening, and why they're happening. And if they're not happening, awesome. Worker inputs. So another thing that regulators are asking is that workers be brought into the process more. So from a scalable standpoint, the best way to do that, beyond just talking to workers and using a professional approach to putting workers at ease and explaining who you are and why you're there, but it is technology. Using worker surveys to understand what's mattering most to workers and integrating that into the audit process is definitely something that we have in the protocols that we're building. LRQA, my old company Elevate, and Greta and I worked on the very first worker inclusive surveys that are now integrated with their SRSA audit. Is still an amazing tool. No other firm's really doing it that way. And if you guys have ever read the SRSA reports that have the worker feedback from the surveys that are alongside the actual audit results, it's a very addictive amount of it. The information is extremely addictive because there's a lot of discrepancies between what the social audit report is based on normal protocol and what the workers are saying. So it's really, really important that we unlock that part of this, but in a way that doesn't disenfranchise workers, that doesn't take advantage of them and brings them into the process. The FLA has also done some great work around inclusive worker engagement on what's being found in the factories, what are the areas that can be improved, what are the things that matter to them. So that's kind of an ongoing objective, what we're trying to do. It's kind of nuanced and tricky, but that is definitely one of our objectives. And then last is the output. Like, what are you getting? What's in your hand at the end of the day? And this also relates to reporting. Reports now, as I had mentioned before earlier, they're not giving a lot of intelligence about what can or might be happening through non-triangulated information that's happening at a factory. I'll use a simple example that they still use at Elevate, but something that we enacted back then, which was really, really powerful, which was what we call an inconclusive result, which meant that based on the audit and the interviews and the review of records, we could not find this particular issue. However, based on facts like the way the workers were talking to us, the way they made the auditors sit in the lobby for an hour and a half before they allowed us into the factory, the way that the records were not available in a normal state, the way that they didn't even have records on certain things that maybe related to production that didn't give us access to. And then also looking at what the factory is saying they're doing versus what we know are salient issues or common practices in the country. You put it together, those are all facts. And they lead up to a, kind of like it looks like a duck, it talks like a duck, it walks like a duck. We believe this to be a duck. However, we were able to catch them red-handed and prove that they're a duck. This type of intelligence in the reporting process is highly critical. We want to start getting at the issues that matter most to workers: harassment, sexual violence, things that you can't just catch, but you can. I think another myth here is that you need to catch people doing things in order to help improve the situation on site. You can understand something that may be happening, and that can then spark training, engagement, other resources towards those suppliers to help educate them around topics. You don't necessarily have to catch them every single time. Or it can lead to additional on-site or additional activities to dig deeper into what's really happening. That can be off-sites, it can be more worker interviews, surveys, it can be a lot of different things, a lot of different tools that are out there. Okay, there's a lot more on these types of the depth of what these really mean on site for at the end of this, and also would love lots of questions on happening, like what's going to happen on site, how it's really going to work, that we have been working through with our on-site process and protocols. Okay. How am I doing on time? Okay, 8:45. Okay, zip me through. We're almost done with this, and then we can get into hopefully some interaction with you guys and questions you might have. So what does the final report look like? So there's two kind of things happening with the final reporting. One, and this is something I'd love to get feedback from the group, is that I feel, right, if you wanted to replace a regular social auditing report or program, that you still would need like a full report in your hand. Like we have our code of conduct that covers these 15 topics or 10 topics, whatever it may be, and I still need a report at the end of the audit that tells me how this factory or the supplier scored. So the first iteration of this reporting is that would be taking all the data that we harvested, all the risk analysis from external sources and lists, and everything we know about the factory for non-salient risk key issues, and bringing all that data forward into a final report that says on this topic, and this topic, the result is based on harvested data and risk intelligence. Then for the salient risk topics, forced labor, freedom of association, wage theft, whatever it may be, all of the scoring in the report is based on the on-site assessment process. You bring it all together and you can still have a comprehensive report that you could show anyone that says, how did you evaluate risk at this supplier? Well, we did these low risk sections using this methodology. And then for the topics that matter most, the topics that are salient, the topics that regulators want us to focus on, we did it in a focused manner with a high level of credibility and detail. And the end result is X. This is the report. And so the other thing about the reporting process is that there was like an initiative called the SQAF, which is basically a list of data points that we believe need to be in every social audit report to allow the reader to understand what it is that they're looking at. And those include details around like who actually picked the firm. And then other stuff that you guys are familiar with, how much time on site, who was the auditor, different data points that you can actually absorb and determine for yourself whether that's a report you think has value, credibility, and that you want to ingest into the way that you look at your suppliers. So that's another initiative that's kind of stalled, but I think is really, really valuable. And we're going to adopt some of these like data indicators that will be in the report that can be shared and absorbed by others. Let's see. Last, because there's going to be more time focused on these salient risk issues, we also, the way the reporting is going to work is that the findings are going to be set up for, they're going to be set up for why this is happening, not just this is the proof and this is what's happening and then like good luck with the cap. No, where the teams are going to be trained and be expected to, if time permitting, again, that the findings are written in a way where there's an investigation as to why the finding is occurring. Why? Because most of these issues that we're going to be looking at and targeting are really important issues, and we need the context in order to move the dialogue forward with the supplier, move towards remediation, and figure out what needs to happen next. That's another really critical difference between what's happening now and what we want to achieve with this process. It says at the end, sorry, I'm just getting a text in from Greta at the end of the ask to send questions in the chat or QA response. Yeah, you can send questions in the chat in this. I think there's another Mendy thing, but you can do that. I don't know. We can do both maybe. Okay. The final is this remediation. This is literally, I mean, the way companies work on remediation themselves, for the most part, what I observe is that basic $150, $300 cap management that the audit service provider is giving is not that effective. We have our own 3-layer remediation support service we call IRSS. And this is just a graphic that shows like level 1, which is kind of like a cap management support, level 2, which is like a 1 or 2 day real support to the factory I'm building out a much better improvement plan, and then like a more, like a deeper project. This is just our structure for doing remediation. There's many out there, many of them that are credible, but this is also what's being asked, right? When you're finding critical issues, what are you doing to support improvement? That's the second piece of it, and it's hard. This is hard work for sure. Okay, let's see. Shoot, only 10 more minutes. Okay, I'm just going to quickly, I think I just have one more important slide here. This is the deployment. So how do we see a service like this working? Again, as I said, a lot of companies now, especially over the past couple of years, that are harvesting and asking for all these different reports. They're leaning into SMETA, whatever, it's easier, it's cheaper. They don't want audit fatigue, whatever whatever the reason is, it doesn't really matter. I think that there's a lot of credibility issues in a lot of these programs, and they're not finding the critical issues. So the first entry point, we believe that's the most compelling of sorts, is to deploy this type of model over across just a certain portion of your supply chain as an assurance program for what you're doing now. So if you're taking all your programs, SMETA or a BSCI or whatever it is, then we believe this is a really great model to focus on maybe your most important suppliers in the highest risk countries and go and do it the right way and make sure that there's not a huge gap between what your regular program is finding and what salient risk issues exist. The second one is a truncated version of this that we are trying to build out for upstream sub-tier suppliers and subcontracted suppliers. Huge issue in these audits exist now is the inability to identify subcontractors that are not being approved up front. So as we look deeper into the tiers, which is also what regulators are asking us to do, we're thinking that this also could be an inexpensive, highly effective, targeted tool at identifying the worst stuff in these upstream suppliers. And then the last one is just a full-scale replacement of what's being done now, which is what I would do if I was starting a company, because this is essentially what's built for human rights due diligence expectations. Okay. Oh my God, gotta say that. Hopefully you guys are still here and listening to me go so fast. Okay, are we doing this again?
Yeah.
Let's do this. Okay. If you could change anything about approach your company or organization takes on human rights due diligence, what would you change? I'll give you guys a minute to answer that. I think we'll just also in the follow-up to this, we will send out a recording and also a survey that digs a little bit deeper on some of these questions, because and we will share the answers to everybody that attended. It's all anonymous. Because again, this is really about feedback, and we have 8 minutes for feedback right now. So there is an invitation right after this to really engage and join a cohort of people that are trying to build this out in a way that's both scalable, effective, and realistic. Okay, if you guys already have it up, I'm going to just go to discussion. Okay, so Greta, I don't know if there are questions coming in. Let's see, that you can see on your side, or whether we really can show the polling results. I think maybe we would have to switch to another presenter, maybe Mackenzie. Maybe you can walk everybody through what we should do now.
So we do have some good engagement. I wish James could hear me, but we've got some good engagement in the chat. So if folks want to take a look, I think the main point to bring into this part of the conversation is actually that we want to, from Mosaic's perspective, we want to really understand and hear from you. And this connects to what James had just mentioned related to the survey that will go out after this. But we really want to understand what internal barriers do you guys face? Because we also understand and have connected with a lot of consensus across industry and among a lot of different people in different positions with this approach. And yet we also don't see a lot of change across the industry in actually getting in and reworking these programs and the approach that we're taking. And so we really do want to understand more about what are the internal challenges that your organization faces, that you face personally in your role, and how do we collectively come together to move through those challenges. And so I think one of the comments in the chat is a really great one to point out related to like, how do we get internal buy-in to totally changing the approach and bringing a much more targeted approach to narrowing the focus of what's looked at on site. So that's just one piece that I wanted to add. Now I'm going to connect with James so that he can come back in. But I'd really invite, if you've got more questions or comments, please put them in the chat. or in the Q&A. And again, we're going to send a survey after the presentation. Yeah, so James, I think he's just going to scan those comments and see if he wants to add anything
so
before
you
we
want me to
close.
just answer some of these questions? Yeah? Okay. So I'm just trying to find one because we have limited time, which one to take here. How do you think APSCA is going to respond to this model? I had a call with APSCA last week with Ross. I think that APSCA, to be honest with you, especially Ross, who's been at the helm there for now a year, I think now that he's into the seat and he knows all the players and who's doing what and what, I think he also has actually a much better understanding of what's not working with some of the social auditing. He has a much more empathy and understanding from what an audit firm is going through in dealing with a multitude of brands and these different expectations and these broadly scoped programs. So I think that he's an advocate of this type of approach. He's an advocate for experimentation. And so I was actually very, very encouraged by what my conversation with him was. Another question here is, you had talked about moving from 5,000 broad scoped audits to 500 salient risk audits. How would you recommend an organization interested in exploring this direction to start to start that internal conversation? That's a big one. I mean, honestly, I think part of what we wanted to discuss was what are the barriers? Like, and I think in our polling or our survey after this thing, the polling is about that. What are the barriers? I mean, and I think for every company, they're different. Having worked with a lot of brands and a lot of big brand programs, retailers, et cetera, I can tell you there's a lot of variation. But I can also tell you that a lot of brands out there that have gone through WROs, that have actually dealt with regulators, that have lost product, they are looking at these broad scoped programs and they're asking themselves internally, what has this got me? What has this brought to me? Is this fit for purpose now? Is this what a regulator wants me to be doing? And if I've been doing this for 10 years and I didn't see any of this coming, they're detaining my product. What is it that you guys have been working on? And you've seen in the news, like broad whole teams are being let go because they're the people that are getting in charge of these programs now are they're chief compliance officers, there's the legal departments, and they're looking at what we're doing. You're like, is this aligned with what these laws are going to be asking us to do? And the question is no, they're not. So I think a theme that I continue to feel, and I wanted to bring this up on the webinars, I feel like this voluntary infrastructure that we built, a lot of which is positive, we're trying to take that and show that and put that in front of a regulator into it and try to make it fit into a totally different model that fundamentally is asking something different to be done. And I think that is the issue, is that that is what we've been doing is not fit for purpose. It's not fit for what's being asked to be done. And so I think, leadership needs to understand that. And if that happens because of regulators in their face, or because it's becoming trendy, or because we're able to do something like this to demonstrate to them that a real risk sits here, this is how you go after it, and this is how you create a narrative as to why you're doing what you're doing, when you're doing it, how you're doing it, and what the results are. Like, that's the future. Will SRSA be mutually recognized by brands? I would hope so. That's up to you, brands. James, you're working with FLA companies currently. Do you have any idea of how the FLA is viewing this? I've had calls with the FLA to discuss this too. I think the FLA is extremely open and willing to experiment. I think that they agree with the fundamental criticism of whether regular code audits are finding the real problems. I think if you're familiar with their Sustainable Compliance Initiative, their SCI process, which has a lot of time on site, it's very, very, very thorough. And you look at the number of findings, those audits, which are being done by independent, small, often non-APSCA member firms that are focused on doing like real work in the factories and engaging workers, those results look totally different than FLA member companies' internal audit programs. And they own that, they know that, and they see that. So I think they're very open to this concept and this idea. And I think to some degree, they're already doing it, right? When they see an issue pop up, they're sending their team and they're asking the brand to go in and do a targeted assessment and figure out what's going on. We are at time. Okay, we got a lot of other feedback, and I think I'm so sorry I wasn't able to hear you. I'm on calls like this all day, every day. But your silence is, deafening, literally. So follow up to this, we're going to send out, again, a survey, we're going to send out a recording, and also an invitation to those that want to dig deeper into the actual on-site protocols we're building, the model we have for the different risk categories about the different countries, how it actually works, in how it actually functions, and then get on our roster of companies that want to do a pilot of this in late July, early August, we're targeting for a few different countries, using highly skilled and experienced auditors that are also being brought into the process for their country, helping us evaluate whether the on-site process and protocols we're asking them to do for certain topics are fit for purpose. And so we would love that feedback. We want to evolve this. This is not an opportunity for us to go out and conquer the auditing world. No, we want to offer something that can be shared amongst others. We think this is the future, and we have a lot of passion on trying to doing it the right way. So we would love your feedback and input on that process. So with that, I will end the event, and you'll see us on email. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.